All right, we're live. Uh, Hello, welcome everybody to the Code and Supply podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Brad Frost, who is the grand deity of responsive design.
Oh,
I'm here.
he's responsive divine.
He is responsive design, the living embodiment of responsive design.
Divine.
Responsive divine. Right.
Yeah.
I'm one of the regular hosts, Alex Shenoy, and I'm joined by Tiffany White and Emma Trimble.
What's up?
Hey.
All right, Brad, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, hi, my name is Brad Frost, and I live in Pittsburgh, same as you all.
Yay!
And long story short, I make websites and help other people do the same.
Nice.
I'll leave it at that, too.
I like that.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess we can start off with you've done a lot of work in the responsive design area. I know we recently, where I work, had a huge push in responsive design. Everybody was when I talked about the fact that we were going to be interviewing you, that was the one thing that everybody said, like Mr. Responsive Design himself. I guess like you're more of a web designer, developer. Like, how do you view that transition into responsive now, as we have different devices that are different sizes and everything? Like, what's that been like?
Yeah. So it might actually help to sort of set the stage a little bit on sort of how I got into that whole world. I was living in New York City at the time, and I had sort of a job that I was a little bit burned out by, which is a severe understatement. But so I needed a new job, and I ended up getting a job at an agency called RGA in New York City, so it'd be like big digital agency. And the only job they had open at the time was for a mobile web developer. And I was sort of like, okay, I guess I'll use that as my foot in the door. And then eventually, I'll get to make real websites. And so this is like late 2009, early 2010. So by that time, the iPhone was already out. So I got there, and I was working on sort of big brand sites for Nike and MasterCard and sort of sites like that. And just looking at the sort of markup that made up these, M-dot sites at the time, I was like, ugh, so it's pretty gross looking stuff. So of course, after a couple months of working there, the light bulb went off, and it was like, oh my God, like this is where everything's going. And of course, saw the launch of the iPad, and so sort of getting into the weeds, sort of specific to mobile, as in like making mobile specific things, and learning how complicated and how diverse the support and everything is across that. It was a whole different ball game. And then whenever tablets came out, doing again more work with Nike, it was like, oh, we need to have an iPad version of Nike.com, and so had to work on that and stuff. So it's really sort of fun to touch all this stuff literally right as it was starting to come out. And then eventually we got to a point where we had some projects we wanted to do, and we wanted to deploy it it's sort of weird. Nike ended up having actually 4 distinct code bases for Nike.com, sort of a desktop site, a tablet site, an iPhone site, dedicated iPhone site, and then a sort of like I hate you, everybody else mobile site. So whenever Android was sort of coming up, they got this like crusty, dirty old experience. It was really sort of amazing. But so anyway, we wanted to make this one particular project. We wanted to put it in all those buckets, right? So we made this sort of like fluid thing that we could just simply shove into all these different size boxes and stuff. So it's sort of like I guess like responsive design before it was responsive design. And it was sort of right as me and a colleague, Jack Bishop, were giving a presentation on this internally at our agency. and we are calling it adaptive design. And then this little list apart article by Ethan Marcotte came out, and we're like, oh, let's chuck that into our slides. And it's like, here, look, like other people are talking about this too. So that's what sort of kicked the whole thing off, where it was sort of going from, okay, let's make stuff for phones, and it's like, oh, here's these tablets. Oh, let's make stuff for phones and tablets, and then, oh, holy smokes, this is really, really difficult, even with brands that have a bunch of money, a bunch of resources and stuff to throw at this stuff. It was still overwhelming, just even in those early days. So that's what sort of like gave rise to, let's take a step back and let's figure out some ways to, sort of create things in a smarter, more flexible way.
Cool.
Was there ever prior to, like, you sort of said like, oh, okay, I'll get in there and do real websites.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a moment of the classic argument of this mobile website thing isn't going to catch on at any point?
Oh my God, yeah. I spent my entire career at RGA convincing people that mobile mattered, and increasingly it became, first of all, it's like, this mobile thing, it might be around. We'll throw it a bone. We'll throw it a couple grand. Just whip us up a quick site. But at most, at the absolute most, people would be seeing 5 or 10% of their traffic coming from mobile devices. So it was like it got 5% of the attention, 5% of the budget, and all of that. And so while I'm there shouting myself hoarse, sort of saying like, hey, this needs to become more and more a priority. Of course, that hockey stick of adoption of mobile between late 2009 and 2012, 13 or whatever, it exploded. So it was cool. It was cool to sort of get in there a little bit early. But there's also not just like mobile as a medium. I think like, not too many people are saying like this is never going to catch on, but there's plenty of people out there, and this continues to this very day. People that say, but mobile users won't do that. Mobile users don't want to do that, right? And so that became the sort of rallying cry, and sort of like my shorthand for that was like like mobile users will do anything and everything a desktop user will do. It just has to be there. Like you just have to provide it. Case in point, like, and this is again sort of pre-responsive days. I was working on a site for Tiffany.com, the jewelry company, and it's like, they had a desktop only site at the time. When we launched the mobile version of the site, we saw these huge lifts in their conversion rates. And it's one of those things where, like, as an outsider, you go, oh, like, who would buy a $12,000 engagement ring from their phone? Like, that's absurd. Like, nobody's going to do that. Yeah, they do. And they do a lot. And again, this is played out time and time again, across every single vertical. eBay sells yachts and private jets and all sorts of stuff from their mobile apps all the time. Yelp was a big holdout for letting mobile users enter reviews from their phones, because they were like, oh, just think of all the typos, just think of all the misspellings and the emojis. It'll be a train wreck. And then whenever they finally reluctantly let people enter reviews from their phones, it's now well over 50% of all reviews on Yelp are coming from mobile devices. So it's really not a matter of whether or not mobile users are going to do it. It's just how much you're going to put in, make the effort to make that mobile experience just as great, or hopefully maybe even better than the desktop experience.
There was a...
So,
oh, go ahead, Tiffany.
So is there much of a distinction now between native mobile apps and mobile websites? From
an experience standpoint, from a tech standpoint, from a feature standpoint, or what?
From a tech and feature standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so long story short, the web is never going to be as capable as native, right? Native is closer to the the rubber meets the road. It's like it's right there. It's native, like it's right in the definition. So native, by definition, lives natively on your phone. So it's going to have access to the device APIs and all the features that are coming out and sort of shipped with these new handsets and stuff. So they're always going to be sort of one step ahead of the web. But that's really not the point. So native apps are great, and technologically speaking, like if you have a valid reason for creating a native app, you need access to Touch ID, or you need access to some device API that the web can't access, or you need that sort of branded experience, that home screen icon and stuff, that thing that people are you're hoping that they're going to be using every single day. You making a native app makes perfect sense. You get hardware acceleration for free. You get like a lot of sort of performance stuff for free. Again, because it's all living there on the device. But that being said, the web is the largest publishing platform that mankind has ever devised, right? So it's not really a matter, and this was another sort of argument, working at the agency, and again continues to this day, of which one should we do, and that's really not the question. It's about play each medium to their respective strengths. Native mobile technology is fantastic. It could do these next level things that really take advantage and capitalize on this new technology. But again, the simple URL is an amazing, amazing, amazing feature. So the ability to send your content, your functionality down to anybody on any operating system, on any mobile carrier, on any mobile sort of manufacturer, on any whatever, without having to ask permission, without having to download any special software. Like, we take this for granted, but like up until 25 years ago, that did not exist. So again, it's about playing each medium to their respective strengths.
Yeah, I was on the bus the other day and I saw someone using the mobile version of Facebook, which really surprised me. So I was just curious to see how you leverage either mobile web or native apps. So.
Yeah, and I haven't seen updated stats, but for a long time, at least, and this is maybe 2-3 years ago, Facebook's M.Dot experience had more usage by far than their native iOS and Android apps combined. That's probably changed, especially. What we're talking here too is worldwide, right? And at the time, Android adaptation, like if you look at Android adaptation around the world versus in the U.S., it's a much different story, right? Not everybody in Southeast Asia and Africa and Europe and stuff, even for that matter, are walking around with iPhones in their pocket, right? A lot of these sort of lower end Android devices are really popular. But all that being said, many people, their lens to this rich world, this rich internet world, is through the browser. Lots of people are around the world are still on 2G networks and things like that. Lots of people. At the time, whenever I was still doing like mobile specific stuff, looking at people's stats, looking at like South Africa's stats and stuff, and seeing this at the time, even like an 8-year-old Samsung phone was like sort of pre-Android, whatever. It was just, I don't even know maybe like a NetFront browser or something, was the most accessed, what was the device that was most accessing the site's stats that I was looking at. So for a lot of people, like the browser is it, and technologies like Opera Mini, which is a proxy browser that sort of compresses web pages down and sort of gives people sort of like a very functional but also sort of a relatively bite-sized edition of a web page. These are transformative technologies that are giving people access to the basic power of the web. So it's really a crapshoot, and really I'd say at the end of the day, it's like you can try to funnel people from one direction to another. You could try to get people to download the app, and Lord knows they try, right? Every site you go to is like, hey, have you downloaded our app? Hey, have you downloaded our app? Hey, have you downloaded our app? Right? But at the end of the day, people are going to use things the way that they want to, and what a lot of times what I tell the clients I consult with and sort of former clients is I'm like, are you on social media? And they're like, what sort of question is that? You know, of course they're on social media. I'm like, well, do you ever share links to your website? And they're like, yeah. And it's like, okay, well then it needs to be it needs to work on mobile, right? And so that was sort of a big trick, selling these concepts and stuff to clients, because if at the time, whenever mobile was exploding, if there's one word bigger than mobile, it was social, right? So it's like, do you want to be mobile and social, right? And they're like, yeah, of course. How do I do that? Here's how you do that, right? So that's sort of how I used to sort of sneak in responsive design.
Yeah, I remember, this is going back a few years, but I remember a few years ago, my sort of aha moment that mobile was going to be huge. I was in a bar with a bunch of friends, and we were talking about a concert that I had known about for months and just forgot to buy tickets for, and the concert was the next day. And so a friend of a friend was going to the same concert, and she brought it up, and I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to buy tickets, and I pulled out my phone and just on the web browser on my phone went and bought tickets. It was like, I'm like, this is great,
Yeah.
like, so that was kind of my big moment of like, yeah, the web is going to be, it's going to be huge on mobile phones. And I'm actually one of the people that uses the Facebook mobile website instead of the app, despite the fact that I've got like an iPhone 6,
Yeah. And again, it's amazing what people will do. Again, there's there is your expected behavior, and then there's actual behavior, and you won't believe the amount of sort of backflips people will do in order to accomplish a task in the way that they either see fit or they, for in a lot of cases, like they have to, right? Whenever people either by way of display nunning on a responsive site, or just simply like not including features or content and not achieving that content parity across devices, people will do amazing things to get done what they need to get done. And again, like I speak all over the place. I have a lot of workshops and workshop attendees and stuff, and people go, yeah, but like this is like I work on like mortgage applications and stuff, or it's like, oh, like like a job application form. It's like who's gonna actually like sit through that big of a form? And then you see Pew Research coming out with stat after stat where it's basically the number's gone up, and it's now like 33% of people like that live below the poverty line use their phone as their primary or sole way of getting online. So it's like, it's not about like the tedium of actually filling out a job application. It's like that is their only way to do that. Like that is their only lens to making this task happen, right? So you have the UN coming out and saying that internet access is a human right and stuff, and I feel like it's our job as people that create for the web to recognize and create for an accessible experience. And I don't mean like accessibility and like the using the right ARIA roles. I'm talking about just broadly, right? We want to cast as broad of a net as possible, and that's not only just good for human beings. That's good for business, right? You get more eyeballs, more users looking at your stuff, using your stuff. Like that's great for business. So it's very weird, like the juxtaposition between a lot of time and people. A lot of times people would say, like we only have like all we care about are iPhones, right? Screw everybody else. Like we just need to make sure that our site like works well on iPhones. And why? Well, I have an iPhone, or the CEO has an iPhone, or whatever. But like then you actually get out there and realize that people are using a whole host of devices to access your site. So it's like we need to think bigger, and we need to act bigger, and again, cast that broader net. And it's amazing like how aligned those sort of philosophical goals of like the web being good for humanity and the web being good for business, how aligned those goals really are.
Does anybody remember when Instagram was coming out for Android, and there were like a bunch of people like that just got completely ridiculous about the whole
Oh yeah.
got like really rude. It was
Yeah.
really strange. I don't know. It just
Like
came to
all-
mind.
Yeah, like all these Android people were just like invading their clubhouse or something. It was
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
ire around that was just ridiculous.
Have
Yeah.
you seen that? Have you seen more recently? Have you seen the whole green bubbles thing?
No, I haven't heard about that.
Okay. So you know how iMessage, if you're on an iPhone and you message another person, they have a blue bubble in your text message thing. But if you're text messaging with an Android user or a non smartphone user or some other platform, you have a green bubble. And so there's like green bubble hate out there, where it's like, I don't respect you if I'm texting you and you have a green bubble.
Wow.
That's really terrible.
Well, that stems from Tim. Didn't Tim Cook make a comment, or maybe it was Phil Schiller? Somebody at Apple made a comment when they were doing the continuity and handoff stuff. They were like demoing that, like, oh, you can now answer text messages on your MacBook. Like somebody made a comment about the fact that like iMessage is this great thing and you can answer messages from everywhere except for these green bubble people. Like how are you going to talk to
Yeah.
them? Like, somebody at Apple actually said that on stage.
Yeah, well, there we go. That's either causation of that trend, or the trend sort of bled onto Apple's stage. One way or the other, it's I'd say not healthy.
Yeah. Somewhat less depressingly, but still conversationally, is Firefox OS still a thing?
I think that they put the kibosh on it. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Up until recently, and I had a few friends actually sort of either working directly on it or sort of building stuff for it, and so it definitely had some interesting things there, and there have been a lot of sort of crossovers between sort of the actual sort of operating system of the phone and the web. Palm's WebOS sort of famously, was like all written in like web technologies and stuff like that, and Firefox OS, and like there's some like smart thinking going on there, but man, I think that world is just crowded, and it's like nobody cares like what technology is built with. It's about like, does it have Facebook? Does it have email? Does it have my calendars? Does it have that game that Bejeweled and all or like whatever other game? So I don't envy anybody operating in that world, and it's been really sort of wild seeing things rise and fall over the years. Like whenever I started at RGA, I mean, we had like the Motorola or the G1, which was like the original Android, and then there's just like this potpourri of other devices that came out, and just everybody was trying everything under the sun, and even in the like that sort of even like that the pre-iPhone days, for sure. Yeah, I love those phones. They were cute.
Yeah. I really wanted a Palm Pre for a long time. I also wanted a Trio, but what were you gonna say?
Oh no! I was just going to comment on the Palm Pre. Like, I think the problem there was not necessarily the platform; it was those creepy commercials.
I don't remember the commercial.
It was with that like, they had like a woman on them, and she would like turn slowly, and like the lighting was really weird. The music was kind of eerie, and she sort of looked like she was like the Borg queen from Star Trek, and like. And then she always said something like really weird and just like strange, and it's like, how does that relate to your phone? I don't understand. I think that was a marketing problem, because the Palm Pre actually was a really nice device. I knew people that had it and loved it.
I still have one.
Yeah.
I remember watching or listening to podcasts or whatever, and having people like Leo Laporte and other people be like, "Yeah, the Pre, it's great," and like a year later they're like, "Oh, never mind."
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess also for anyone who doesn't know about Firefox OS, since it is kind of, I mean, it wasn't really even marketed. Whenever it was marketed at all, it wasn't marketed in in the U.S. very much. I guess it was like a
It's for developing markets for sure. Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
low-powered device, cheaply made, cheaply distributed, and now that's what they're aiming for. So.
and everything was based around like all of the apps on the phone were all web sort of based type things,
Yep.
which is a neat thing because then also like you also said earlier, like you can just go to a website and then you don't have to worry about getting their app or whatever.
Yeah, and that's been around for a while. I mean, like obviously, there's meta tags and stuff to add, the Apple's Touch ID, or you could save it to your home screen and stuff like that, and that's sort of how it started, and actually sort of in the pre. App Store days, like that's what people did. Is like I'm going to go to CNN.com and like save it to my home screen and stuff like that. But those have gotten it's been an interesting evolution of these sort of like hybrid technologies. Like, what is the relationship between the native mobile platform and the web? And because people aren't necessarily firing up their browser, like that's not the path that they tend to get to web pages. I mean, case in point, Facebook's browser is the most popular mobile browser. It's like, and it makes sense. It's because you see a bunch of stats that just don't make any sense. It's like, people spend X amount of their time in social apps and in native apps. And like barely any time on the web. It's like, yeah, but what are they actually doing in that app? It's like, yeah, they're looking at text updates and photo updates and videos and stuff like that, but they're also clicking on a bunch of links and reading stories and things like that. It's again, that wall between native and web has never been very, very thick and sort of siloed and rigid. It's this very fluid thing, and I think that's something to embrace rather than sort of create some artificial divide by. If you want to talk about tech, though, it's like for a while, there's like PhoneGap, there's other sort of solutions out there to sort of use web technology to make native apps. Like that stuff's all great, and it's it's all evolved over the last 5 or so years and stuff, and now we have sort of like progressive apps, which I'm actually, I think, a little more excited about. That it's sort of, they feel a little more born of the web rather than sort of like web technology, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript sort of bundled up and then sent down the pipes the same way as like a native app would be. So that stuff is all sort of, I guess, on the horizon, but and I could barely wrap my head around most of it, I guess, but we're getting closer to sort of creating these sort of more seamless experiences, because really at the end of the day, users don't care. Users just don't care. Right? I want to look at some photos. I want to complete this. I want to apply for a job. I want to do this. I want to write back to my friend. Like, none of that hinges on any specific technology, right? So the more places you could do that, great. The more fluid that process is, great. It doesn't need to be an either or thing, and it's always frustrated me. Like the web is dead, right? Wired came out and said that on their cover a while ago. It's just like, oh god, here we go. So I don't know. I'm rooting for the web.
It's really interesting because I'm probably in the minority maybe, but I go out of my way to not install an app if there's a good mobile version of the site. Like, I will go out of my way to not, like, that's what I do with Facebook. Like, I use the mobile Facebook client because I don't want to install their app on my phone. Mm-hmm. And I do the same thing for stores that I shop at or whenever I use it. Like, I'd rather go to the website than install some store's app on my phone.
Yeah, my friend Scott Jensen talks about this, where he basically says, do we really need an app for every store we go to, every airport we visit, every restaurant we go to, every service we use. It's tedious, and it sort of had like a joke about tending to our app gardens, right? Like this might sound familiar. You go through your phone, you're swiping around like once every couple months, and you're like, what the hell is this? What the hell is this? Don't use this anymore. I don't even know what this is. Like, gone. And so it's like you have to like weed your garden, your app garden. And if you look at the stats, I mean, it all sort of confirms this. The average person on a weekly basis, they download 0 apps. And if you look at the apps that dominate people's time and attention, it's a handful. It's a literal handful of apps that constitute like 80% of people's time using their phones. So it's like, if you want to talk about investment and like barriers to entry and stuff, like that's really, really tough. Like if you want to compete with Facebook, with whatever like the other sort of top apps are, it's like, good luck with that. But again, like that's if you have a great idea, something that necessitates those device APIs and stuff that you have some authentication thing that it's like, oh, if we use Touch ID for this, like then we can create this really seamless experience. Like those are great things to explore. So what I often tell people is I say like, think of native apps as sort of like the ultimate progressive enhancement, right? It's like you could get away with a web-only experience and be just fine. The opposite isn't true. You can't really have like a native-only experience and not have sort of like a web equivalent or a web like complement to that. Things like Uber, I guess, are I think very much in the minority as far as like they can sort of get away with that.
I think it's interesting too because I think Touch ID and like the fact that now password managers are able to do like extension things in Safari, like that has actually cut down the number of apps that I install too because I can use Touch ID to open up one password to fill in the login form in Safari, so I don't need the app to log me in anymore, right? So because login has gotten easier on the mobile web, I now tend to use the mobile web more than an app, than an app.
Yeah. Touch ID is the touch thing for iPhones, right?
Yeah, the like fingerprint sensor. And I think there's similar stuff on Android phones and.
Yeah, on the 5P or the 5X and the 6P there is. I have that, but I just wasn't sure because I've always been an Android user. But
Nice.
Sorry, continue.
Oh no, I was done. I was just saying that like it's made me use the mobile web even more than native apps.
Yeah. Persistent login is huge. I mean, login is a huge barrier to people actually using your stuff. It's like I'll check my email and it's so and so wants to connect on Facebook or so on, and it's like click the link and then it's like you hit the login screen. It's like nope, don't have time for that. It's like it is a huge barrier to entry. People like Luke Wroblewski have been talking about this for years, like this whole notion of like killing the password and just like sort of making things like a lot easier to just get people in the door and using your software rather than making them jump through a bunch of hoops. So I'm all for that, and whatever shape that takes, right? And again, native apps are great, and you could have sort of a persistent login there. But yeah, increasingly, the web technology for doing all that is getting more sophisticated as well.
Cool. I know that you've done. You're writing a book, and that's people can actually read parts of the book, right, or the whole thing.
All of it, yeah.
All of it, yeah. Can you talk about atomic design and what that is? Because I know there's a ton of responsive frameworks out there, but atomic design is more of a framework for building your own framework, kind of. I guess is my take on it.
I'd say that's a pretty accurate portrayal. And to sort of, I guess, sort of bridge these two topics together. So sort of how my interest in sort of more modular UI design started taking shape was, again, back in those sort of mobile web early responsive design days. Whenever we first started working on responsive projects, I sort of like floated in between different teams as more or less like as like a consultant that just sort of specialized, I guess, in mobile or whatever. So as like responsive design started catching on, we started doing a bunch of different responsive websites, and it was like three teams like in the same week, weirdly enough, were like, Brad, how do we do responsive breadcrumb navigation? And I'm like, that's like weird that three different teams are sort of struggling with the same sort of pattern at the same time. And so I was like, well, I guess I could write this email 3 different times, or I could have 3 different meetings, or I could put together just a couple little demos, a couple little just sort of like sketches in code about like some basic patterns that they might employ to solve the problem. And so that went over really, really well. And I was like, wow, like maybe we can sort of keep doing that. And so that's what I did. And that led to a project that's called This is Responsive, which is a collection of all these patterns for how to make these things work, how to make UIs work across all these different screen sizes, devices, environments, and stuff. So we have like carousels, different navigation treatments, breadcrumbs, grids, just basic things like here's what a responsive image looks like, this sort of like squishy image. Tabs to accordions, stuff like that, forms adjusting their label positioning and things like that, right? So the whole idea is here's these sort of like grayscale vanilla patterns that aren't meant to be necessarily like used, but just as proofs of concept, right? To just sort of demonstrate an idea. And so that worked really, really well. And what that necessitated was starting to break things down into its component pieces, right? Because it's not about like, oh, how is the homepage responsive? It's like, well, what's on that homepage that needs our consideration? And so what ended up happening is, so over the years, people started publishing their style guides alongside their newly responsive site. So the big one, the sort of like Boston Globe of pattern libraries, was Starbucks.com. So Starbucks went responsive like 3.5 years ago maybe, and whenever they released their new site, they also released alongside it the style guide, their pattern library that they're using. Here's like all of our bricks, all of our component pieces that we're using to create the new Starbucks.com. And so that was like, wow, like, this is so cool, right? They had like little patterns like blocks 3 up and stuff like that, which are just like 3 little blocks that sit next to each other, and you can resize your browser and see how they react. So more and more of these things started getting released. I was really, really liking them, but as much as I love these things, I couldn't help but in a lot of cases they just sort of felt like sprays of modules. It's like, okay, we get it. We're making modules now, right? And so it's just like, some of them were better organized than others, but it was just like everything's a module. And I was like, I feel like there's sort of like more of an opportunity to be sort of a little more deliberate with how we go about making these sort of modular UIs. And so that's what led to what I now call atomic design. So what atomic design is this sort of 5-stage methodology for creating your own interface design system. So atomic design is atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. And they all happen at the same time. So sort of like caveat everything with that. It's not like a step 1 create buttons and then step 5 create like the final page. So what I'll sort of, if we have time, I guess we'll sort of walk through what each one of those stages is. Is that helpful?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so atoms are the sort of basic building block, right? So like atoms in nature are the basic building blocks of all matter, right? All matter in the known universe is comprised of this finite set of atomic elements, right? Hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, all that stuff, right? And so we on the web, we have that too, right? We have labels, we have headings, we have image tags, we have, right, you get the idea, right? These things can't be broken down any further, right? There are basic fundamental Lego bricks. but like atoms in nature, they're not terribly useful on their own, right? They're sort of like an abstract concept, not exactly, sort of, you can't like actually use them just as is. So at the molecule stage, what we do is we take some of those atoms, right? Like let's say a label atom, an input atom, and a button atom, and combine those together into a simple component that I call a molecule, right? So simple components. Now this thing, that label atom defines that input atom. Now clicking that button will submit that form, right? So now you might have like a little like search form molecule kind of thing. So it's this like little encapsulated piece of UI that you could chuck in anywhere you need search, right? So then the third stage is what I call organisms, which are relatively complex components. So you have your sort of search form molecule, and search typically exists on a lot of different experiences in the header, right, in the site's header. So the header organism might be comprised of a logo atom, a primary navigation molecule, and a search form molecule. Right? And we see that like go to any website, there's going to be like a header that operates as a unit, as like a cohesive whole that sort of makes up this sort of distinct chunk of interface, right? And that's represented across all of our interfaces, right? So sort of the basic split that I've done with Atomic Design is like you have molecules, which are relatively simple components, and then organisms, which are relatively complex components, right? So there's sort of like a mode in thinking that's maybe a little more granular than what we've sort of seen in the past. The fourth stage is the template level. So I learned very early on, whenever I started doing this with clients, that if you keep with the whole chemistry analogy, they're gonna think you're crazy. So I'm like, all right, so we need to sort of like abandon that metaphor and sort of go into something that our clients are gonna understand. So what templates are, so now you have these sort of complex organisms, these complex components that we now combine those together into sort of like a final sort of layout, right? Into like an actual layout. So you could actually see these things in the context of what looks like a page. But the trick at the template level is that we're more concerned with the underlying content structure of the components rather than like the final like UI like design. What content is going to be poured into those hero areas and media objects and things like that. So then at the page stage, that's where we take that template, that content skeleton, and then pour real actual stuff into it. And so obviously that's the phase, that's the stage that we're most used to operating in, right? It's the most complete thing. It's the thing that our users are going to interact with. It's the thing your clients and your bosses are going to approve. But it's also at this stage that we're sort of testing how resilient all those underlying patterns are, right? What happens whenever you pour real content into your designs, right? Into all those little bricks. Do they hold up? Yes or no? Does it look funky, right? Do things wrap onto multiple lines awkwardly? Does functionality break, right? And if that's the case, then you need to go back and sort of solve that stuff at a more atomic level, right? But also at this page stage, what I found is it's really helpful for articulating variations in templates. So like quick example, you might, let's say you work for a bank, right? The user logs in to their banking account. They hit a dashboard that shows their recent transactions, their recent activity, and sort of like other sort of stuff, right? Well, that's all well and good, and so you might see, yeah, like a list of your recent activity and stuff like that as a normal user. But what if you're a first-time user and this is your first time logging into this experience, right? Wouldn't you want to sort of modify the UI in some way to sort of, either have like a little welcome widget or something that sort of like, changes the way that interface is presented? Or another case is like, okay, so you're making a blog. Well, what does that blog look like whenever you have a YouTube video embedded in the content of the article? But what if you don't have one? What if you have a table embedded within it? What if there's 0 comments on that article? What if there's 100 comments? Right. So it's all these different sort of scenarios, all these environments and sort of variables that we need to take into account. And our systems need to be resilient enough to sort of, handle all those situations. And this is where I think, like, sort of thinking along these lines, and especially coupling this with sort of designing in the browser and moving this stuff into the browser faster allows you to, deal with those realities much, much sooner. You can't do that in Photoshop, right? Or you're just going to spin your wheels. It's like, so that was always sort of like my frustration, is that all of the Photoshop designers would, create a profile page and like the avatar looked like it was clipped out of a magazine, and of course their name is like Sarah Smith, and Sarah without an H, of course, so there's like no, it's never going to wrap onto multiple lines and stuff like that. So at that page stage, what we're really doing is we're sort of stress testing the system of patterns. So collectively, so atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages sort of collectively form this sort of what's essentially a mental model, right? So it's like you could still do your work like the way that you're that you're used to, like creating a final UI, but you're just being more deliberate with like how you're putting that final UI together, right? So you're simultaneously creating the parts and the whole at the same time.
Cool. Oh, Emma, were you going to say something? I thought.
No, just making an interested noise. Is that right?
No, I think it's really cool because it's like what you're really talking about is sort of breaking down the problem of UI design the way that we talk about breaking down, like on the back end or code side of it, like the way we talk about breaking down like components of our software into smaller, more manageable chunks that then talk to each other, right?
Yep.
Like it's a very
keeping things dry. Don't repeat yourself. The sort of single responsibility principle. But yeah, like object-oriented programming predates the web by a long shot. So it's like it's just now that this stuff, those concepts are starting to bleed out into other areas. We're seeing that with more modular CSS. So what people like Nicole Sullivan and Jonathan Snooks and Harry Roberts are talking about, with BEM and SMAX and OOCSS, it's like that's all born of that same sort of idea. We're seeing modularity bleed out in a lot of different ways. Instead of big monolithic redesigns every 3 to 5 years, we're instead trying to move towards more like sort of rolling, iterative updates. Instead of having just giant blobs of text in a CMS system, as Karen McGrain calls them, breaking things down into sort of chunks, right? Reusable sort of content chunks that you can combine in a lot of smart ways using metadata and stuff like that, right? So it's like it's across the visual design for that matter, style tiles, element collages. Everything is sort of going in the way of sort of modularity. And again, these are really nothing new, but because of the device diversity that we have to deal with, right? We're on the hook for making more stuff, providing more features to more users across a bunch of different browsers, devices, screen sizes, network connections, like device capabilities. It's like there's just so much to deal with that we need solid ground to stand on. And this type of thinking, this sort of like modular, like let's take these like giant problems and sort of break them down into smaller pieces, is I think what's really making this a very present day problem, even though a lot of these concepts are like old as hell.
Yeah. All right, we are kind of getting a little bit close to time, so I think we'll do a little bit of a wrap up. You're going to be speaking at our Abstractions conference that's coming up in August, so people can come and check you out there. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I write. Well, I'm writing my book at atomicdesign.bradfrost.com, so you could read all that stuff I was just harping on about. You could read more about it there if that's interesting. I blog semi-regularly, even despite the fact that I'm writing the book. But yeah, that's where I share a lot of my thoughts on sort of web design and stuff like that. On bradfrost.com, and I'm pretty much always on Twitter. I pretty much live on Twitter at Brad_Frost.
Cool.
Are you going to be talking about the same sort of things or your book at Abstractions?
That's like years away. That's good. I've got so much going on. I'm like, where am I? What city am I in? What country am I? So
it's like 0.5 years away. Yeah.
We'll figure that out.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure.
That's all right. But yeah, there's a safe bet. It's a safe bet that I'll talk about some web-related things and probably some sort of modular-related things, just because that's been what I've been really immersed in over the last couple of years.
Cool.
Do we want to do our Twitter handles? I'm at Alex Shenoy on Twitter, basically everywhere. I'm at Alex Shenoy and alexshenoy.com.
I am at Tiffany W_412 on Twitter.
And I'm at Emdandrim, EMDANTRIM on Twitter. Yeah.
Awesome. And as always, you can find Code and Supply at codeandsupply.co, and check us out on YouTube. Come to our meetups, and definitely stop by and listen to Brad's talk at Abstractions in August. It's going to be a blast. Thanks a lot, Brad, for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Take care.
Cool.
Take care.
Yep, you too. See you later.